Hello, friends. Welcome back to Colliding Worldviews, found only on ABN's Trinity channel. As always, it's great to have you here with me every single week. It's a huge blessing for people throughout the world to get educated on these different topics that we do, and also to hear the great guests that we have from around the world. And my guest today is definitely from around the world, pretty far away from where we are. She is in Australia. She's been here on ABN's Trinity channel a number of times before, and she is a religious liberty analyst and advocate. She is down under in Australia, so it's great to have her here with me today. Elizabeth Kendall, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, and it's good to be here, Tony.
Elizabeth, it's great to have you here because a lot of people are unaware of the persecution that's happening around the world. I want to point people to your great website with all the different articles that you put out, and of course the ongoing newsletter updates about what is happening. And friends, you can find her website, or at least her blog spot is what it is technically, rlprayerbulletin.blogspot.com. And you can sign up for her email update. She'll keep you updated on the persecution that's happening around the world. And in this first episode, we're talking about that persecution, but what God is doing, because God is doing something new, and she is here to tell us about that. Again, her name is Elizabeth Kendall, rlprayerbulletin.blogspot.com. Elizabeth, you have been monitoring, analyzing the persecution of Christians throughout the world, religious liberty, and all of that for about 20 years now. Over that time, you've written hundreds of your religious liberty monitoring reports, and I hope that a lot of people pick those up, because here in America, the mainstream media doesn't report on the persecution of Christians throughout the world. So I thank God for you and your work. And friends, subscribe in order to stay updated on this stuff. But you've put out a bunch of those. You have two books. One of them, a book that a lot of people need to get just to understand why a lot of the persecution happens in the world today. After Saturday comes Sunday. Of course, Saturday referring to the Jews who celebrate the Sabbath, worship on the Sabbath, and of course the Sunday, which is referring to the Christians and the Islamic promise that after they come for the Jews, they're coming for the Christians next. Get that book that she wrote as well. And also, while persecution is nothing new, you believe that God is doing something new, something unprecedented in relation to persecution, and that this new thing is not insignificant. Rather, it is integral to how God is working out his purpose and fulfilling his promises in the world. So please tell us, what is this new and unprecedented work that God is doing that you're observing in regards to persecution?
Well, Tony, I've been raising awareness of persecution for over 20 years now, and urging churches and believers to pray for the persecuted and to support the persecuted. And for much of that time, I felt like I was banging my head on a brick wall. You don't see a lot of change, and sometimes you just wonder, what you were doing, but you just press on and you press on. Well, after 20 years, I'm actually convinced that change has begun to occur. I am noticing just in recent years that there are many more aid and advocacy groups that are working specifically with the persecuted church. And a lot of that has arisen because of the growing need, but also because of interest that has been raised. So there are more denominational groups, there are more ethnic groups, there are more non-denominational groups, all very active helping the persecuted church. I've also noticed that there are more journalists who are now eager to write on this subject. In fact, there are more journalists and writers who are saying to me that they feel God has called them to this ministry of writing on the persecuted church and monitoring the situation. There are more broadcasters willing to talk about the subject, and there are more publishers willing to publish on the subject. Many people in this field would be able to testify that even 10 years ago, it was almost impossible to get a publisher to publish books on politically incorrect subjects like religious persecution and Islam and other things. But increasingly, publishers are willing to publish. There's also, along with all this, of course, a growing awareness among Christians of the issues, and a growing hunger, I find, amongst Christians for information. So I actually believe that things are changing, and that this is no longer a subject that people need to shy away from. I believe God is actually really doing something new in this area in our day.
And how do you see this as being integral in how God is fulfilling his promises?
Well, if you think about some of these great promises of God, Christ is building his church. And that's one of the greatest promises that we have, that Christ will build his church and that the gates of hell will not prevail against it, that he will build it from Jerusalem into Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And we've especially seen this in the last 60 years. We've seen a real, I think, an acceleration of this growth that has been occurring over the last 2,000 years. 60 years ago, about 70 to 80% of the church was white, Western, and middle class. And today, 80% of the church is coloured, non-Western, and poor, simply because of the way that Christianity has exploded in recent decades in the non-Western world. And because of that, Christianity today is truly a global faith. And this is something unique. This is something uniquely Christian, and it's new. This is a recent phenomenon. The only real hole left, I think, in if you had an image of the world, would be the Muslim world. But that is precisely where God is at work today. He is filling up, he is doing an unprecedented work in the Muslim world.
Elizabeth, I want to go ahead and have our technician show slide 1 so people get a visual when you're explaining what's going on here.
And when you see this map of the dispersion, the global population dispersion of Christians, what you are seeing is a picture of how God is fulfilling his promises. This is what, the promise in Genesis 12 looks like. Through your seed, Abraham, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And, this is the promise of the mustard seed, that though it begins as the smallest of all seeds, it will grow to fill the whole earth and to be a wonderful blessing. So we are actually seeing God fulfilling his promises. And what I am seeing now is something new, and I believe something unprecedented, that God is doing within this global church, this increasingly global church. The God is doing a new work, a work of the Spirit to knit us together as one, not through administration or organisation or any human effort, but through linking up the hearts of believers as we come to truly love one another and care for one another, not just in theory, but in practice. And this is a unity that is practical and observable.
Elizabeth, another map that would really complement this one, because this is a great one to let people know where the Christians are. Did you see the email I just sent out the other day about my new presentation called Lights Out?
Yes, I did.
And in that, there was a map of the Muslim world today, and the darker the green, the higher the Muslim percentage of the population. And if people look at this map, can we just show picture 1 there again? If you look at the area, North Africa, you see that it's mainly white, and you see more blue down below. If you contrast this map to the map in that brand new presentation, you will see that that upper area of Africa, where it's very white in this picture, is very dark green in the one in my brand new presentation called Lights Out, When Islam Rules America. And a lot of people are unaware, Elizabeth, that back at the turn of the 8th century, so we're talking the year 700, 701, the Middle East was about 95% Christian, and today is less than 6%. So, I mean, what happened? Obviously, Islam, according to Muhammad, happened, but we can see here, too, how there's this dispersion of the Christians throughout the world. And, of course, we know what the persecution is happening to them still.
Mm-hmm. And it's the same with Central Asia, too. That's the other big hole, is Central Asia. And God is at work, and I think God is going to do a truly amazing work in the future through the East Asian church that is going to evangelize Central Asia. But I think that the work I'm really witnessing, I think in my work, is how God is knitting us together. There's a unity, a spiritual heart unity is forming. And I truly believe that the 21st century will go down in history as the century in which God knitted together this increasingly global church using cords of love forged in the flames of persecution. And of course, this is precisely what Jesus prayed for in the Garden of Gethsemane on the night when he was to be betrayed. He prayed that we would be one, that the world might believe, John 17. And so what we need to do is we need to get on board, and we need to embrace this mission of service and ministry to the persecuted church.
And if people look at the Fox's Book of Martyrs, which some people think, oh, that's the only time that persecution took place, was right after the disciples were killed and then the gospel spread. That book tells us about the Christian persecution that happens, but no, it's continuing to happen. It's actually escalating today more than ever. So what situations are you most focused on right now?
Well, yes, persecution has really never ended. It sort of comes in waves and varies from time to place, but it has always been here. And probably the most serious situations I'm monitoring at the moment are the situation in the Middle East. So the Christian crisis in the Middle East, particularly in Iraq. You know, the Christian population of Iraq has been absolutely decimated. So the Assyrians, the Assyrian nation, they are the indigenous people of Iraq, just like the Copts are the indigenous people of Egypt. The Assyrians are the indigenous people of Mesopotamia, so Iraq and Syria and into southern Turkey there. And at the last census, there were 1.4 million Assyrians in Iraq, and today there's about 200,000. And most of those Assyrians are actually displaced and destitute. ISIS overran Karakosh and all the Nineveh plain, which is the heartland of the Assyrian people. They overran that area and ethnically and religiously cleansed it in August of 2014. And they can't return, even though ISIS has pretty well been, or the caliphate at least, has been crushed. It's still too dangerous to return to their homes. So these people fled with nothing but the clothes on their back, and they're still displaced, and their homes are too dangerous to return to. So ISIS is making a comeback in both northeast Syria and in northern Iraq. And there are car bombings regularly in Mosul and Kirkuk and other places around the northern Iraq. But right in the Nineveh plains, the heartland of the Assyrian Christian peoples, there is a massive land grab going on. So that whole area that was ethnically cleansed by ISIS is now being sort of fought over and struggled over by Sunni Kurds and Shiite Shabaks, which are a Shiite Arab tribe, and they're the proxy force of Baghdad and Tehran. And these groups are fighting over the Nineveh plains, which is referred to as disputed territory. This is the heartland of the Assyrian people. So we are seeing a genocide take place, and it's not talked about by anyone. It's terrible. So I'm trying to keep this as much in front of people as I can. Nigeria is another really serious and critical condition. I don't think many people realize how fragile the situation is in Nigeria. Nigeria is quite fragile. I think it is even teetering on the brink of civil war to a large extent. You have Boko Haram terror in the north. So it was Al-Qaeda linked, and now it's an ISIS-linked terror organization in the north. But you also have the Fulani people who have been radicalized in recent years and in recent decades The Muslim Fulani have been radicalized. They have been co-opted by Boko Haram and other Islamic groups, and they are moving south from the north into the Middle Belt. And what they are doing is they are massacring often, large groups of people in villages. They'll go into villages at night. They'll shoot, they'll kill, and they'll drive these Christian peoples off their lands. And the Christians are settled peoples. They are the indigenes of the area. They have farms and crops, and the Fulani come in with their cattle herds, and they just kill and they take over the lands. And the government is so corrupt. And there's so much corruption in the government that they are actually prolonging the conflicts in Nigeria for financial gain, all through corruption with military procurement and everything. And the Christians are dying. They are pleading for help. They are acknowledging that there is essentially an ethnic cleansing and a jihad taking place right through the Middle Belt, and the government is doing absolutely nothing to help them. One of the other really serious situations that doesn't get a lot of airplay but is very, very serious is the situation in India, and the implications and consequences of the rise of Hindutva or Hindu nationalism. Now, the Hindu nationalists came to power with a majority government in 2014. They came to power on a platform of good governance and development. And they managed, even though they were Hindu nationalists, who teach that India is the land of the Hindus and that everyone else is a second-class citizen, they managed to get Christians and Muslims voting for them because they preached this anti-corruption development platform. This time, it actually looked like they might not get their majority, but they did. And they did it by using data analytics and by micro-targeting through social media right down to very small groups and castes and tribes. And they would micro-target with hate messages. So messages, most regularly, the hate message relates to the threat of conversions. You have Christians in your area and they are converting your people, whether they are Hindus or animists or other tribal, animist groups. They are converting them to Christianity. And this is a threat to your existence, a threat to your communal harmony. And they are sponsoring and facilitating communal hatreds and communal intolerances for political gain. And that is how they came to power this year in April, May of this year. And so I am expecting the persecution, which has been bad for a long time, I'm expecting it to get even worse in this year and in the coming years under the Hindu nationalist rule. And one of the really difficult things for Christians in India and also in Pakistan is how incredibly poor they are. The Christians in the subcontinent are mostly the poorest of the poor. They're the untouchables, the low castes. They are so voiceless and so vulnerable, and they really desperately need the voice and the aid and the prayers of Christians around the world. They are just so vulnerable. The other situation that is really, really serious and is going to get a lot serious in the years to come is the situation in China with the Chinese Communist Party's drive for complete and total control over the people. So the Chinese government is setting up what they call the social credit system. And to do this, they have rolled out millions, something like 200 million facial recognition cameras with the most high-tech facial recognition software that's available anywhere in the world. And this monitors Chinese citizens in real time. And people will get what they call social credit. Now, the system is to start next year, but it's already being trialled. And people will earn good credit for doing good things, That's things that please the Chinese Communist Party, and they will earn negative credit for doing things that displease the Chinese Communist Party. Now, this is going to really hurt the Christians. They're even extending the rollout of the cameras, went right into the churches. So the Chinese Communist Party is monitoring who goes in and out of churches, who puts what in the church plate, what is being preached from the pulpit, and all this will be used for the social credit system. Now, the thing with China is they've been able to go after the Uyghur Muslims the way they have because the Uyghur Muslims are an ethnic group that live in a particular location out in the west of China in Xinjiang. So China has gone after them geographically and hit them hard. They've done the same with the Tibetan Buddhists. They've gone after the Tibetan Buddhists in their monasteries in Tibet and in the southwestern regions of China. The trouble with the church in China for the Chinese Communist Party is that it is spread right across the country. It is spread right through all levels of society, from the poorest peasants through to doctors and lawyers and all levels of society. And it is right through the Han Chinese population. So how can they get to the Christians, to control the Christians? They will do it through the social credit system. And in the years to come, Christians are going to find, and it's beginning to happen already in Xinjiang, it's already begun, Christians who upset the Chinese Communist Party will find that their children can't get into university. Their children can't get into the best schools. These Christians can't get treatment at the best hospitals. They can't travel. They can't do anything. They can't get government jobs. They are going to be squeezed and they will suffer. And the church is going to have to be praying for our Christian brothers and sisters in China, because God has a phenomenal purpose, I believe, for China, for the Chinese church, for the Korean church, for the East Asian church in evangelism right across Central Asia and the Middle East back to Jerusalem in the future. And an incredible spiritual battle is taking place.
What's interesting, Elizabeth, is that in these different countries that you talked about, sometimes there is bottom-up persecution, where the persecution of Christians is happening with neighbors, people in their neighborhoods, and so on. But then we have, as in China, this top-down persecution, which is coming from the highest level of government down on the Christians. And the worst case, of course, is when it's coming from both angles, both top-down and bottom-up. This persecution is really serious. But you believe that if the church were to respond seriously and passionately with sacrificial love and commitment, it would really help. How is that?
Look, I believe that if the church really was engaged here, and I mean churches as in local churches as well, I feel really passionately about this, not just individual believers, as important as they all are as individuals, but churches as bodies. If there was a really serious, passionate response from the church, it would enable the saving of many lives. That's just obvious. It would enable the preservation of whole Christian communities, such as the community in Iraq that has been largely displaced and destitute and devastated. It is only through us giving and praying that they will survive, that they will be sustained. I also believe that a serious and passionate response from the church will facilitate the sanctification of the church, as the church becomes in practice what the church is in theory and indeed in reality, and that is the body of Christ. And I believe that a serious and passionate response from the church would present the watching world with a vision of sacrificial Christian love that reflects the image and sacrificial love of Christ, that the world might believe as Christ prayed. You know, I really maintain that support for the persecuted church is four things. It is subversive, redemptive, sanctifying, and missional. It is subversive in that it undermines Satan's plans. Satan is strooning bodies across the battlefield, and we are supposed to run away in terror. Well, we're not going to do it. It's also redemptive because it redeems Satan's work. He destroys, but when we go in with sacrificial love and commitment, then we return that evil to good. So it's redemptive. It's also sanctifying because it unites the church in love that we might be one. And it's missional because it is a witness that the world might believe. And, you know, this is what Francis Schaeffer called the final apologetic. In his little booklet, The Mark of a Christian, he talks about brotherly love, the love of the body. He says this is the final apologetic to the world. And so it is. If the church would just get on board, this is not a mission for political activists. Support for the persecuted church is really significant and hugely strategic in the purpose and the will of God to both build his church throughout the world and to unite the body that the world might believe.
Amen. I saw a great article, too, on persecution. I think it came out about a year and a half ago, and it was called something like Christians in America Never Forget How Easy You Have It. Because when we think about our lives here in America, currently at least, and what we may face persecution-wise, it is nothing compared to what's happening overseas in these countries that you, Elizabeth, focus on every single day. And that's why we really appreciate your work, keeping us updated on what's happening. Things that will never be talked about in the mainstream media is what Elizabeth talks about in her website and her bulletins. Friends, please subscribe to her newsletter, and you'll see that all that she is saying is absolutely true, and she will continue to keep you updated on what's happening throughout the world that you will not get in the mainstream media here in the West. Elizabeth, we thank God for you and your great work. Thank you so much for being here on Colliding Worldviews.
Thank you for having me, Tony.
Friends, we also need to remember that the gospel is what needs to be shared. The gospel needs to be shared with all people. All people includes all Muslims as well as everybody else. Please stay tuned because we'll be back with another episode of Colliding Worldviews with Elizabeth Kendall from Australia. God bless you, and we'll see you soon.